Naiomi, thank you for joining us today. The Trudeau government announced 2 years ago it was splitting Indian Affairs, and it did. What's the significance of this split now being official in law?
Sure. So the split the government said at the time was to have Indigenous services focus specifically on that, and then have Crown-Indigenous relations more specifically look at reconciliation and negotiations. And I had some thoughts about that at the time and wrote some stuff on that, and it is in keeping with implementing RCAP, but I had been concerned at the time that it was a little bit premature, given that they hadn't brought in all the other steps that RCAP had called for. But what this does, there's these two new acts, and they sort of set in place the legal functioning of these new departments, which doesn't seem very exciting on the face of it, but it is replacing the old Department of Indian Affairs Act, which had really nothing in it about how the department's supposed to act and what it's supposed to do. And so what I wrote about was how these new acts actually are interesting because they do put in some language about how the department is supposed to act, what kind of services it's supposed to provide, which could be used by Indigenous people to push the government in situations where it says it doesn't have an obligation to do something, or things that I've seen certainly in my past legal practice. So it can be used to hold the government more accountable.
So there was this resistance to the split that you speak of, even though it was recommended by the 1996 Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, because Indigenous peoples weren't consulted. What do you think? Is there any good in this split? I think the split is just an administrative change, and if you're not doing all the other things that the RCAP had proposed, which had talked about creating a land and treaties tribunal. It also had talked about an act that recognized significant self-government powers and all kinds of stuff. So even RCAP said, if you're just going to do administrative changes, it's not enough. You need to do all those other pieces. But my greater point is that this act in law, that's particularly with respect to the new Indigenous Services Department, is helpful in some respects and can be used. And now finally, with the federal election looming, what should people watch for on this front? Will a new government be able to undo the Liberal Party's changes?
Well, governments can always undo something in law unless it's in the Constitution, but laws are hard to undo. They're a lot harder to undo than policies, which is why I argue in the piece in Yellowhead that this is an improvement, because most of the things that INAC had always done had always been by policy and very little in law. And the problem with that is that government can change things around a lot, whereas when you have things sort of set out more directly in law, you can hold them to it in court or in negotiations in a little bit of a stronger way. So, and I don't think a government's going to necessarily want to go knock all these things down. It draws attention if they're going to repeal laws. So it's stronger than it was before, and it will be harder if we have a different government to take some of this stuff back.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks for your input, Naiomi.
Thank you.